just for everyone's information, we will be recording the meeting. So if you have anyone in mind that you think might be interested in this meeting but missed it this evening, this link to the recording will be going up on our website after probably late tonight or early tomorrow morning. So check out our website, either rivercog.org or rivercogregionalplan.org, and you'll find the meeting materials and you'll find the recording. So you'll be able to share that with anyone in your town that you think might be interested. So, all right, so let's start off. Welcome, good evening. My name's Sam Gold and I'm the Executive Director of RiverCOG. And I wanna welcome you to our first in a series of 4 workshops that we'll be holding in December and January that are gonna be important building blocks for recommendations in our first regional plan of conservation and development. But before we kick this off, I'm going to turn it over to our regional planning chair, Frank DeFelice, for a few words of welcome. So,
thank you very much, Sam. I appreciate that introduction.
Yeah.
As Sam mentioned, my name is Frank DeFelice, and for the past 5 years, I've had the pleasure of serving as the chairperson for the Regional Planning Committee for our 17-town RiverCOG region. And on behalf of the more than 24 municipal representatives who serve on the Regional Planning Committee, many of who are in attendance this evening, and you'll see their names on one of the slides we're going to put up shortly. I want to express our sincere thanks to each of you for attending this very important and, in these times of rapid change, particularly relevant workshop on the subject of demographics for our regional plan of conservation and development. Following tonight's workshop, the RPC is hopeful that you will continue to participate in the plan's development, sharing your vision, outlining the issues that are important to you, critiquing our work, and identifying the goals that will define and improve our region during the next 10 years and beyond. And with that, I'll turn the presentation back over to Sam. Thank you very much, and welcome everyone.
And for this, you'll see this slide later on in the presentation. This is the listing of all our regional planning committee members. These people are your representatives in this process, and they make up the steering committee for our regional plan. You'll notice, I see Ed Bailey is on a call. Middlefield has no representation, so so if you have any people that you want to volunteer to fill those vacancies, please, we welcome them.
I do have, we do have someone that'll be appointed at our next Board of Selectmen meeting.
Excellent, and you'll see that there's a few others, an alternate for Old Lyme and for East Hampton and a few other opportunities. So if you see that your town doesn't have a full appointees, please contact us or your first select person or mayor, and we can get you appointed. So, all right, so let's get started here. And let me queue up the presentation and we'll get started. And at this time, I just want to remind everyone, if you could mute your microphones. During the breakout sessions, we'd like you to talk, but right now this, so everyone can hear the presentation well. All right. So, first of all, when we start this workshop, we'd like you to sign in. You can sign in by clicking the chat box on the bottom of your screen. You'll see in the Zoom window, there's a chat function. If you would like to type your name and the sign in to the meeting. Also, if you would like to include your email address, we'll make sure that you get on the mailing list for the other workshops and for other events and on the distribution list for drafts as we move through this process. So please feel free to sign in. We're going to conduct this workshop in 3 segments. We're trying to replicate an in-person workshop as much as we can, and we hope that this approach through Zoom is successful. But please bear with us. This is the first time we're doing this, but I think we're going to have a very interesting and engaging evening. But we will give you some more guidance and logistics as we move through this presentation. So let's begin with a little background. We are here this evening because RiverCOG, the Regional Planning Committee, and our consultant, Fitzgerald & Halliday, are working on the first ever regional plan of conservation and development for the Lower Connecticut River Valley region. As you may be aware, the Regional Plan of Conservation and Development, or RPOCD, is a visionary policy document that sets goals and makes recommendations regarding preferred land uses, development patterns, and types in desirable areas for conservation based on existing and emerging regional trends and challenges. On June 29th and July 7th, we held a region-wide introductory presentation that offered a primer on RiverCOG, the RPC, and the RPOCD. We then spent the summer virtually visiting each of our 17 municipalities' planning and zoning commissions. And at those meetings, we gathered input on issues and goals in each of our towns. And we also got information about how every town in our region sees itself fitting into the larger region. At all these meetings, we made recordings, and they're all available on our project website, rivercogregionalplan.org. Throughout this time, over the course of the summer and fall, we've been working on an existing conditions report, which compiles statistical data on current trends and key issues in the region. This document is in the process of being finalized and will be attached to the Regional Plan of Conservation Development as an appendix. All of this effort has brought us to tonight's workshop, the first in a series of 4, which will focus on the issues we heard were important to you at the municipal meetings over the summer. This workshop will focus specifically on demographic changes in the region, and we will be presenting statistical demographic data compiled as part of the existing conditions report. After presenting a series of data points, we will separate into breakout groups and ask for your thoughts on what you've heard. The feedback we receive from you will directly inform the recommendations in the regional plan. At this point, I'd like to introduce Francisco Gomes, who is our project manager from Fitzgerald & Halliday. Welcome, Francisco.
All right, thank you, Sam. So our agenda this evening, Sam was kind enough to provide an introduction to the planning process, but we really want to get into what's happening in the region and what the trends have been over the past 10 years or so by looking at some demographics in the region. And we're grouping this discussion into 3 overall parts. In the first part, we will talk about population change, household composition, and race and ethnicity. And that will consist of me going through some statistics and discussing some findings with you from our existing conditions work. We will then have a breakout session that will last about 20 minutes where we will talk about the implications of those findings. Then we will come back to the presentation. I will present on education, jobs, workforce, and income. And we will go into another breakout session. And coming out of each breakout session, each moderator of the session will provide a brief report back, just a couple of minutes on the key themes. And then finally, we'll conclude with a discussion of housing supply and market trends. And we'll have a breakout discussion dedicated to that topic. As Sam mentioned, we'll be divided up, and Eliza is behind the scenes making all the technology work for us. All you have to do is follow along, and we'll all get to the same place, and then we'll all come back together. So with that said, I'll go ahead and get started with the discussion about population. Next slide, Sam. Sam's still in control, so thank you. So let's talk about population changes. These are some of the trends, and Sam, if you click once more, we'll go to a very important time and point on this population trend chart. And that is in 2012 in the region, and that includes the entire Lower Connecticut River Valley region, which is all Middlesex County in both Old Lyme and Lyme. And I'll use the region loosely throughout to talk about all the communities. Sometimes our data set is just for Middlesex County, but as much as possible, we incorporated data from New London County specific to Lyme and Old Lyme. So the most salient point here is that in 2012, your death rate exceeded your birth rate. That means your natural population change is negative. So in order to remain stable or grow, you have to have migration into the region. Okay, next slide. Whenever you're ready, Sam. There might be a little delay. Thank you. Good. So I mentioned migration. And here it is right now. Over the 8 or 9 years between 2010 and 2018, it's actually 9 years total. You as a region lost close to 2,000 people. And most of that was from domestic out migration. So people from the region moving elsewhere in the US. Fortunately, you had a migration of over 2,000 people internationally coming to the region. And if not for that, you would have had a lot more population loss. So there's something about the region that is attractive to immigrants. And you know, north of 2,000 over that period is, you know, is a size of, it's a notable number. So it's very important to balancing population in the Connecticut River Valley region. Next slide. Now here's one of the factors at play, and this ties into the death rate exceeding the birth rate, and that's as a region, you're older. And the top line, the purple line, that's you. And in 2000, your average age was 38.8. 18 years later, it's 45.6. And that is a very big change, because in 2000, you were slightly older than Connecticut and slightly older than the United States. And then you're departing from the trends for both Connecticut and the United States that are on the same trajectory, even though Connecticut's a little older than the nation. That has all kinds of implications, right? It has implications on housing value, on economic viability, on culture, on education and school enrollment. There are many, many implications associated with an older population. And on average, you are now 7 years older than you were in 2000. Next slide. And here's how the population distributes. On the left side of the chart are females, right side males. And what we're looking at is you're really top heavy, right? You have boomers and Gen X, but you're not replacing that population with millennials or Gen Y, with the younger generations. And that is increasingly going to become problematic with respect to housing. Are you going to have the right type of housing in the region to accommodate people that need services, whether it be assisted living or a nursing home or any other type of housing? And then what's the impact on that if you don't have young people to replace them with respect to generating housing demand? What's the impact on housing values? And looking further down the road on assessed values and tax base, and right, there's a lot of implications. So everything's pointing to the fact that to be more sustainable as a region, you want to stabilize your population, and you need to attract younger folks to provide stability over the next decade or two or three, for that matter. Next slide. All right, and here are projections done by the state of Connecticut. I have to provide a caveat to this, that these are just projections, and they were done several years ago now. They were done prior to 2015. But it is an indicator to suggest that the state's demographers do not have a bullish perspective on the potential for population growth in the region. And much of that ties into the birth rate and death rate and outmigration. And as you can see, there's only a handful of communities that are expected to grow: Cromwell, Lyme, Middletown, and Portland. And everyone else is expected to contract, with Clinton, Deep River, Essex, Killingworth, and Old Saybrook expected to contract the most. As I mentioned, these are not only several years old, but it doesn't account for some recent migration shifts that we're seeing related to COVID-19. It's on the theme of Charles Dickens' Christmas Carol. The words may not be, the words may still be sponged from the stone. Okay, these trends are not set in cement, but it does suggest that as individual communities, as a region, you need to be very proactive to make sure that this is not your fate. Okay, it's a shrinking region. Next slide. All right, your household size, you are just a little smaller than Connecticut as an average at 2.3 persons, and much of that has to do with being an older region. More empty nesters is what it comes down to. So there's nothing too surprising about this. Next slide. And then this is an interesting statistic or demographic here. Compared to Connecticut, you have more non-family households, and that is, in a non-family household could mean a person living by themselves, or it can mean unrelated persons like roommates or boyfriend and girlfriend, someone not related by marriage or blood or birth. Additionally, you have fewer households with children. So I think what you're looking at here is much of this is related to being an older region, and a lot of probably people that are single, living by themselves, particularly in their older years. Next slide. You are not a terribly diverse region, 84.3% white and non-Hispanic. But that has been changing a little bit. And let's go on to the next slide and I'll explain that. When we compare Middlesex County in this case, and both New London County as well, what we see is that you are far less diverse with respect to percentage of foreign-born residents than Connecticut or the United States. Connecticut is actually higher than the United States at over 14% foreign-born. And this data is PUMA data, the public use micro data area, which is more or less commensurate with your counties. And you are at half that of Connecticut. So you're not very diverse from a place of birth perspective either. And next slide. Your foreign-born population has actually decreased since 2010, and much of that has to do with a good part of your foreign-born population came to the region a long time ago, right? They were Italian immigrants or Polish immigrants or many other European and Eastern European immigrants. And so those folks, as we saw in the death rate, those folks are no longer, many of those folks are no longer in the region. And so that's contracting. You are replacing some of those folks, however. If we go to the next slide, I'll show you what's happening. So when we take a look at, and as I mentioned, Italy and Poland, this is a map of where people who were born outside the United States and live in the region came from. And so Canada, anything that's colored in blue, and the darker the blue means more people, that's where people came from. So Canada, Mexico, obviously, but you can see in Eastern Europe, you see both Poland, you also see Italy, but China. And China is a more recent migration. And so that more recent migration from China are replacing some of the foreign-born people that are either moving out or have passed away from Italy and Poland and some other places in Europe. So you are changing a little bit demographically, but you remain not really, really diverse. Okay, next slide. And that's reflected in languages spoken as well. The top language is Spanish, and then there's Italian and Polish right there, French, but Mandarin and Cantonese, and that reflects the more recent migrations from China. And once again, you're at half the national average with respect to foreign-born languages spoken in the home. Next. So with that said, we are going to now go into our breakout discussions, and you will be prompted to click on a window or a button to join the breakout. And rest assured, we will see you on the other side. We will be there to greet you, and then we will be able to come back together. So please follow along, and we'll talk about the implications of these findings.
And I think we have probably enough for, if 38 participants, I think we have enough for maybe 3 breakout sessions.
Yeah, let's do 3.
Yeah. So Eliza, do your magic. And everyone click on the button when it comes up on your screen.
Yep, just give me 1 second, everybody.
Yep.
Provide a very brief bullet point type synopsis of your discussion. I'm not a professional transcriber, so you're going to have to watch some ugly typing, but I'm going to do my best. So with that said, given what I just reviewed, was that information consistent with your experience in your town and the region as a whole? Does anything about those trends and statistics surprise you? Does it reinforce what you already knew or felt? And we will go to Stephen, and Stephen, just unmute yourself to speak.
Well, I'm in Middletown, and we have a final draft of our plan of conservation and development. So we've been looking at our own data, and then also I'm aware of apartment complexes being built. And construction trends, frankly, none of it resonates.
Oh, yeah.
So, but I realize we are an outlier, I think.
Yeah.
We may be a big elephant, but we're an outlier in the region.
You are very much an outlier. And the story in Connecticut, for the most part, has been that the cities are growing, right? And the towns are contracting. And that's a broad brush, but that's
people and their experiences in their towns. But we wanted to sort of do a reality check. Are we missing something?
Yeah, I think that definitely that So on the Conservation Commission, just, this is very anecdotal. I don't even know it's important, but, the number of, for instance, subdivisions that have come before us has dropped dramatically in the last few years, as opposed to, early when I was on the Conservation Commission in the 2000, 2010, we had a lot more subdivisions, right? So anecdotally, I see that, yeah, we're not doing as much building, from a Conservation Commission perspective, I'm kind of okay with that, but okay, I'll stop there.
Well, no, that's when I came to the region 5 years ago, we at RiverCOG are responsible for reviewing subdivisions on town boundaries for
Fisherman.
Anyone else? Yep, same. This is Cindy from Chester. I pretty much agree with what everybody else is saying that I have. It is my experience. I've been in Chester since 2004, so 16 years now. And I have seen an increase of some diversity in our town. I know that the St. Joseph's Parish, I believe, initiated a Spanish-speaking part of the congregation and had Spanish-speaking masses pre-COVID. I'm not sure what they're doing now. So, and then also I have seen some Asian businesses open, one in Essex, a nail salon I was going to pre-COVID. and we have a Thai food restaurant downtown.
Okay.
So definitely in a couple of African-American families as well.
Mm-hmm.
So it is encouraging. I like seeing the diversity and I hope it continues that way. And also it'll be interesting to see now with the shift in COVID and the population and people buying homes in our area. Definitely see a lot more New York City license plates in town. And so it'll be interesting to see updated data. And I think important for us to evaluate that going forward through this process.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're all interested to see what COVID means for all of this.
Yeah, it's going to mean a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Big shift, I think.
Absolutely. Any other thoughts before I move on to the next questions? I think the next questions are a bit meatier.
Good. I mean, that's exactly what people are talking about. We don't quite yet have all of the numbers to describe that with respect to like census data, and we're starting to see that in real estate trends and some other metrics we use to measure it. It will take probably another year before we can really measure that with census data or any other type of measurements. All right, Josh.
I guess I'm already unmuted.
Yeah.
So I guess the thing that and I agree, we'll talk about housing at the end, but there's certainly a supply and a demand point here, which is we're right next to Durham, we're right next to Middletown. If they're gonna see a 20% rise and we're gonna see a whatever decline, it's hard for me to believe that type of housing sort of dislocation could occur. And so
are you referring to the state projections, the population projections?
Yeah, primarily as my first glimpse at the
And where are you, Josh? What town?
Durham.
In Durham, yeah, okay. Okay, so population projections questionable. Okay. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of factors involved, and of course, they're projections and they're a few years old now, so there's a lot that could change still. All right, Sandra.
Yeah, hi. This is going to be a little irregular because I don't have anything to say about Essex, but as far as foreign-born people moving into the area, I'm pretty familiar with that because I teach literacy to immigrants. And the projection for Clinton, I don't know if anybody in this breakout room is from Clinton. Feel free to contradict me. But there has been an upswelling of South Americans in Clinton like you wouldn't believe. So let me just say that the numbers in the last 3 years are totally off the chart.
Really? Okay.
Compared to your previous slides.
What do you know what's attracting them? Is there an industry, or do you know what's behind that migration?
No, I don't. Most of them are from Ecuador. They're in all different kinds of jobs. I think some came and they've just bringing the rest of them. And there are jobs in the Clinton area.
Yeah.
And rentals are reasonably low. The cost of rentals is reasonably low.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. All right. Well, let me go on to the next question here. We've got 3 questions, and I want to make sure we have enough time to get to all of them. So based upon what we've discussed, what issues do you see for your town or the region, based upon the statistics and trends? And not everyone at once. I'm looking for a raised hand. Okay, Sandra, thanks again. Go ahead.
Yes. In Essex, we need more housing for singletons. And the structure of the zoning code is quite restrictive. At the moment, there's talk with the new Planning and Zoning Commission, which has come together from 2 separate ones, overlay zones to mitigate some of the restrictions on accommodation, like an apartment over a garage.
Right.
For single people. So this is a strong consideration right now. In other words, how, without completely tossing out years and years of zoning restrictions and rules, can we make allowances for what's happening in town?
Okay, thank you. And Phyllis.
Yeah, I'm from Lyme, and I didn't get to respond to your last question.
Clinton, even up in Lake Busick and Middlefield, anywhere that has seasonal houses, people may now turn their city apartment into their seasonal residence and live up here for a while. So yeah, go ahead.
And also Old is thinking about their having a review of a affordable housing development as well in an area of the town that doesn't have much construction right now.
So, okay, say that again.
There's actually also in Old Lyme an affordable housing project that's going before the land use boards right now. That may also bring some additional housing opportunities in Old Lyme.
Yeah, we are. Later on, we're going to actually be talking about housing, but I'm taking all these notes so I can rearrange them as necessary when so we won't have to repeat ourselves. So let's go to the next thing. What issues do you see for your town or the region based on these trends? I think some of them are pretty obvious, and I think it comes from things you've already said, volunteers. Towns are run on volunteers, so either to volunteer to help run town government through being commissions or all the various commissions that need commissioners, but also our emergency services, and I think Mary, you're correct with political parties. Like you can't have a healthy political scene in your town without people volunteering. So other issues that are I can start typing out some of the obvious ones, but I'd like them to come from you rather than me. Go ahead, Bill.
Probably all the towns have or all, especially the southern towns, have a declining school population, and the subject comes up. More regionalization. I know Westbrook is tiny little system with that's not in a region, and it periodically comes up. So school population decline and just of regionalization.
Yeah, and I think you're right. Though, as Westbrook's, if the enrollment drops, there'll be, I think probably, I know that I was talking to your first selectman. I asked, like, when was the last time that a discussion had taken place with Clinton and Old Saybrook, and he said that had happened relatively recently, but if trends continue, I would assume those discussions would happen again, and it's possible. But what does that mean? What does that mean if you give up your local school district and you're now part of the regional district? So, yeah. So obviously, with aging population, we have there's town services that people need. So whether it be senior centers, senior transportation.
He's in my room.
And also just supportive services to allow people to age in place, age in their homes. People want to stay in their homes. They don't want to. But what does that mean for housing demand? It may mean a greater need for assisted living or smaller rental units or condo units where people don't have to maintain large houses. So.
Yeah, if I could just add, and Nancy alluded to this, in Old Lyme and Lyme,
Hi there, James.
Wait, is this not PPP? I thought I went into PPP.
Hi, Mr. Senate.
Hello.
Hello. We have about 40 people in this meeting, and they're in breakout rooms right now. That's going to be ending in about 3 minutes, but I'm going to assign you to a breakout room so you can hear what they're discussing.
Okay, fine. Thank you.
You're welcome. Oh, okay. You know what? I did already assign you to breakout room number 2. Do you have a pop-up somewhere asking you to join that?
No, I don't. Wait a minute. No, I just.
All right. I'm going to try to put you in breakout room 1. Let's see what happens. You might get a little pop-up that's asking you to join it.
Okay.
Do you see anything?
No.
Let's see. Is there any kind of notification coming up at the bottom of your screen?
No, I got the mute, stop video. I should. No, I do not.
Okay. Hang tight. Everyone's going to come back in about 2 minutes, and then we're going to go. They're going to have another portion of the presentation, and then we will go into breakout rooms again. So I think once you're in the second half of that meeting, I should be able to assign you.
Okay. What is in the breakout room? What's that consist of?
So basically, we talked already about some of the changing demographics in the region as relates to race and ethnicity and what country people have come from. And then we broke the group up into 3 smaller groups just to discuss if that's something you feel you're noticing in your town, or if that's inconsistent with what you've seen in your town, and asking about issues surrounding that for the region. So then when they come back, they're going to discuss another part of demographics. I think the next part might be having to do with jobs, and then we'll go to the breakout session again for smaller group discussion.
Okay, fine. Thank you.
Thanks.
All right. Welcome, everyone. Welcome back.
Yeah, it worked well.
Yeah, that worked well. So, you know, it went by really fast. We were racing at the end to type some things.
Yeah.
So I will do better. I apologize to Breakout Groups. We will watch the clock a little bit closer next time. So, all right. So after each one of these breakouts, we're going to do a little report back. I'm going to start off and just hit some of the big items that we talked about in our breakout group. Well, we heard a lot from people about their towns. So in Westbrook, the trends that we presented, they've seen an overall decrease in population. Some anecdotally, some increased diversity and more foreign-born residents. A dramatic drop in subdivisions from 20 years ago. We heard from Portland that they're starting to see fruit from their investments in trying to turn around a declining population by allowing accessory dwelling units. They've seen younger families moving in. They've invested in town amenities like town parks. And this was a large investments of millions of dollars, but now they have younger families moving in and younger volunteers, which is really important to our communities. We heard from Lyme and Old Lyme that there's a lot of new population coming because of Pfizer and electric boat. We're also, and those younger families are coming in, are looking to get involved, both by volunteering, but also getting involved politically, which is changing the town's political landscape. But we are seeing some generational turnover in those towns. And in particular in the schools, they see, although they were declining over time, that new influx into those two towns has kept their school enrollment somewhat stable. With the addition of sewers and Old Lyme, they're thinking that there'll be more year-round residents. So in a number of our towns, we have seasonal homes, and those seasonal homes might be transitioning to year-round residences as people who live, particularly in our larger urban areas, and want to get away from New York City or Boston, are now transitioning to living in some of our former seasonal housing. That brings greater population without any increase in housing. And then we also, so the general issues that we saw based on these trends, issues of volunteers, issues of aging population, shrinking school populations, and more pressure to regionalize schools, and also more demand for senior services. We touched upon the need for more affordable housing and more diverse housing stock. We will be discussing that later on in our housing section, but that came up very early. And then the final thing about the aging is that some of our towns have a number of 55 and older housing developments or assisted living or nursing homes. And there's a concern that in 20 years, those developments will be significantly emptier. And that those might be an opportunity, particularly the 55 and older developments, potentially for affordable units. So we should be thinking 20 years in ahead of how some of those units that are meant for some of our older residents might be used differently in the future. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to, I think, Megan. Were you the next breakout? All right.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Megan.
So thank you. We heard a lot of the same things that you already mentioned in your group. Particularly, we were anecdotally saying that in the region, our group has also seen quite a bit of diversity increase, although admittedly we were starting at a fairly low bar, so this increase isn't necessarily, leading to a diverse population by any stretch. A little surprised by the type of population that we supposedly have in the region, expecting to see more from Portuguese population, also from Asian countries, just from what people have seen around. Curious about what the COVID impact will be on diversity, just with more people coming in from New York, which is far more diverse than we are here. And then just a general consensus that these trends are good, that our diversity is increasing, and that should be encouraged in any way possible. As far as the issues, we also talked about how an aging population or a reduced population means fewer volunteers for our activities. I talked about the implications on property values, less kids in schools, and also specifically that people who grew up here, from a millennial perspective, people who grew up here can't necessarily find an appropriate job or an appropriate house or afford a house here, so they're forced to leave, and that's part of the declining population. And then what to do about it: affordable housing, seconded and thirded and fourth by our group, and also more local job opportunities. And then I guess I'll pass it to Francisco.
Thanks, Megan. Between you and Sam here, I don't have a lot to say here because our conversation was very similar. The one exception to that being Middletown, which is kind of bucking a lot of these trends by growing, by attracting migrants, a very diverse community, by having affordable housing. So Middletown's the real outlier. But with that said, it was mentioned that there's an upsurge of South American migration into Clinton that we didn't pick up in the demographic trends, but it's been over the last 3 years, so it's not quite showing up in any of the census data yet. And there are concerns and questions about the state population projections, about just how it's even possible for that sort of contraction to occur in one community next to a community that is stable or growing. And then another important point to make is that the region could be a great place for people to work from home, but it really needs universal high-speed internet access, and that's really, really important to the region. And then overall, just better connecting residents, and this was specific to Middletown, but could apply to the whole region. Better connecting residents to their communities civically and to services, and to have people more engaged and active, whether they're new migrants or whether they're a second, seasonal homeowners that are quasi-residents of the community. And that's about it.
Thank you, Francisco. And I'll just, as a little census data education to everyone, a lot of our data we're using is the American Community Survey, which is, for many of our towns, a 5-year average. So any new trends like South American immigrants moving into Middletown, it's going to take time for that to show up in the American Community Survey because it's a 5-year average of surveys. So thank you very much for that, because that's something which the census data wouldn't be able to show yet. So with that, I'll turn it back to Francisco to continue on with education. So let me share my screen and we will we'll continue on to our next topics.
Okay, education. You are a highly educated region, and that's across the board. You have a higher percentage of high school graduates, bachelor's degree holders, and graduate and professional degree holders than both Connecticut and the United States. So that is also reflected by the fact you're home to a fantastic university, that being Wesleyan in Middletown. And as a whole, you have some higher wage jobs that require advanced degrees. So you're a very educated region. Next. Now let's talk about school trends, and Sam, stay on this one for a minute. Let's not click yet. I've got a few charts that are going to stack up on top of each other. first of all, looking at school enrollment, and this would be public schools in the state of Connecticut, school enrollment is going down. Our young kid population, our school-age child population is shrinking. And this starts on the left in the blue bar at 2014-15 school year and gets us all the way up to last year, 2019, 2020. You can see that's an extremely consistent downward trend. And just click once more, Sam. I also pulled profiles from just a handful of your districts to give you an idea of what's happening in the region. We didn't grab them all. Middletown. Middletown, even though there's been some growth in the community, the enrollment is down a little bit than a few years ago, but not by a lot, right? It's gone down, it picked back up a little bit. So it looks like it's stabilized, but it's not growing. You're not growing with respect to school enrollment. And then very quickly, we can skip through some of the regional districts that we have profiles for. District 13, you see that trend. That's 300 kids less than 5 years ago. Next. Region 17, down about 200 kids. And next. Region 4, down 120 or so kids. And next. I think we have one more. Yep, Region 18, down about 60 kids. Although you notice that little surge in last year, we don't know what that's from, but the overall trends have been down. And this has all sorts of implications for school districts. For many, and it's different for each district depending on where they were at with capacity and teachers and buses. But generally speaking, as you lose students, your cost per pupil goes up, and you're not necessarily reducing costs until you shrink enough to retire a teacher and close a classroom or close a school for that matter, which has been happening all over Connecticut. All right, next slide. So now the big question mark is, what is going to be the impact of COVID-19 migrations and our kids getting enrolled in public school, and what's happened with school enrollment? Are kids being enrolled in private schools or being homeschooled? And I don't just mean virtual schooling at home, but I mean actual homeschool because of COVID. So there's many variables in this equation, and the numbers aren't yet out for the October enrollment figures for this past year, but that might be very telling. One important statistic though, and this comes from United Van Lines, or the moving company. They do a survey of everyone that hires them to ask them why they're moving. And Connecticut was the #3 state in COVID-related moves to the state. Vermont up at top, and oddly enough, North Dakota in second place, and that may be people jumping ship from South Dakota, we don't know. But 20% of people moving over the past several months said they're moving to Connecticut because of COVID. And so we heard that anecdotally, and people moving from New York to Connecticut because of COVID. And so the big question mark, and we'll know a little more next year, is what are the impact on our schools? Okay, next slide. Let's shift gears and talk about jobs in the region. And jobs, this is a little different from your workforce or labor force. Jobs are the jobs that you have in the region. And you have many people that fill those jobs that come from outside of the region to fill those jobs, like from New Haven or even Rhode Island or wherever it may be. What we see is you have a wide diversity of jobs in the region. The biggest single class in this particular breakdown, and these can be assembled in all sorts of different categories depending on the data set we pull from, is healthcare and social services. It's the biggest single class. However, roughly 11% are in two industries that have been hit really hard by COVID, and that's accommodation and food services, arts, entertainment, and recreation. And much of that, of course, is shore related and tourism related as well. But what I really like about this chart is the diversity and the distribution of jobs. So as a region, you're somewhat resilient to economic fluctuations because of all of these colors. And there are many places that are far more monotone and are heavily dependent upon one sector of the economy. If you're in West Texas, that would be oil, right? That would be energy. But fortunately, one of your strengths is this diversity of jobs. Next slide. Now, where are those jobs concentrated? In Middletown, really, and along 95, more or less. A little bit on Route 9 in Essex, but Middletown is doing most of the work in the region as the region's employment center. And that probably doesn't come as a surprise to people, but that's where Middletown's functioning as a city for the region with respect to that. All right, next slide. Growth in jobs has been steady since 2010. In Connecticut, Connecticut's really interesting in that it often lags the country in many trends, and that we also saw in the Great Recession, where the impacts of it were felt later in Connecticut, and the recovery was also later as well. So as we take a look at Middlesex County in this case, we really didn't see an impact to jobs in the region until 2010. And then it's been a slow road to recovery. And fortunately, it was a pretty quick recovery because around 2014, you got those jobs back. And it's been growing since, but at a very modest pace. All right, next slide. Well, let's talk about wage growth. So if you look at this chart, it looks great, right? Wages are growing, and 18.1% wage growth from 2009 to 2019. Here's the catch, 19.2% inflation rate over that period. So wages aren't keeping up with inflation, and that's not unique to Middlesex County. That's in Connecticut and across the state, but you're not or across the country, but you're not outperforming either. Next. This is a positive trend, 12.6% growth in the number of business establishments since 2011. And we know, however, that 2020 may be devastating to these numbers, but I think we could all hope for a really vibrant and robust response and recovery once we get through this. But this is a positive trend, and it really reflects well on the potential in the region. All right, next slide. Now, this chart shows where unemployment claims were from, and this is based upon where a person lives, not where they work. And what we could see is all of Connecticut really felt a lot of pain with respect to layoffs or furloughs or job losses. But it's very evenly distributed throughout the region, with most towns experiencing about 140 unemployment claims. And this is over, I think, the 5-month period between March and August. So it's very evenly distributed throughout the region. We're not seeing any one town or city that has suffered significantly more than another. All right, next slide. All right, let's talk about your workforce. Now, your workforce is different than jobs. Your workforce are the people that live in the region and the type of work that they do. And many of them actually work in the region as well. So we are picking them up with the jobs. But a lot of them migrate out of the region to New Haven or up to Hartford or wherever it may be for work. And so when we take a look at your workforce and its expertise, it really makes sense given what we know about your education levels, in that 56% of your workforce is in management, business, science, or arts occupations. And only about 10% is in production and transportation of materials. So I think it's consistent with what we know about your education levels. Next. Now, where do those people live? So this map is very similar to where the jobs are, in that there's a strong concentration in Middletown. And the fact of the matter is, a lot of people like to live very near to where they work. And that's reflected here and along the shore, along 95. But as you can see, you know, obviously you have the entire region, you have residential development throughout. And so we see that here. And then, so this is more or less kind of a density map, but I think the way this is different than a region that has a much higher share of younger workers is that you would have darker concentration, darker areas in individual towns where you had a bunch of young folks that comprise the neighborhood that are working and still actively plugged in to the labor force. And here, because you have a lot of retirees, it kind of waters things down a little bit. All right, next slide. Now let's take a look at labor force trends. And you know, this is consistent with the downward trends we saw with the economy and jobs, in that between 2009, 2014, you lost labor force. So people either stopped working, retired, or workers moved away. And you fortunately since 2014 have recovered, but you still haven't got to as many resident workers as you had in 2009. And a lot of that are you're an aging population. A lot of these folks are retirees. That's how you're losing. Next slide. It's important to point out that you also have seasonal fluctuations in your workforce. And so you have people that are either laid off for part of the year, or they come here to live for part of the year, and then they leave the region, whatever it may be. You have a consistent up and down, and spiking in the summer and lowering in the winter. And that, much of that's related to the shore and to some tourism. So there's a seasonal aspect to this. But if you notice at the very end, that plummet, that drop is in March, happens in March and April. And that's a drop of, you know, over 6,000, about 6,000 jobs. Or not jobs, but workers, people that are workers in the region. Next. And the biggest impacts, and I'm sorry, it's a little hard to read. The biggest impact is to self-employed people, and this is a statewide chart. Self-employed people have made the most unemployment claims. That's the bar at the chart, or at the top of the chart. Followed by accommodation and food services and arts, entertainment, recreation. And so what we see is consistent in the lower River Valley RiverCOG region as across the state. Next. Income. Income, you're outperforming both Connecticut and the United States, and that goes back to the types of workers that you have and to their degree or level of education. And that's much higher than the state as a whole, you know, about $9,000 higher and significantly higher than the United States. So, I mean, this is a good thing for the region. This is a good demographic. Next. However, there is some income disparity within the region. And, you know, some of that's due to the cost of housing, cost of living, and or just low wages in many jobs in the service sector. So when we take a look at ALICE stands for, it's an acronym, stands for Asset Limited, Income Constrained, but Employed. So these are folks that are working, but are struggling. And so This is a distribution by town. The highest, and it probably comes as no surprise, in Middletown, where 33.2% of people are income that are working are income constrained, and the lowest being in Haddam at 12.5%. Next. Poverty rates. Poverty rates vary, and Middletown, of course, being a city, has the highest poverty rate at about 11% of households in poverty, and the lowest, I think Old Lyme is lowest at, or Killingworth is lowest at 2.1%, with Old Lyme at 2.6%. And this is typically what we would expect of generally higher poverty in cities and bigger towns that are suburban communities where you have access to services and transportation, and generally lower and slightly more or rural and definitely in communities that have higher wealth as a whole. Next. Now, poverty rates. Now, this is what concerns me the most, and this is not unique to Middlesex County or New London County. And this is the trend for Middlesex County. This is looking back to the year 2000. And what we see is poverty, or the number of persons in poverty has grown quite a bit since then. And it was 7,000 in 2000, and now it's close to 11,000. And there have been some fluctuations along the way, and we're now, this is dated up to 2018, and there was fortunately a decline from 2016 to 2018. We see this statewide too, and across the country, but we're not moving in the right direction. Next. All right, so once again, we will go to our breakout sessions and we'll follow more or less the same procedure. Okay, so once you get your cue, click on it and we'll see you in there. And we'd like to hear your input on, economics in the region and income and poverty and that sort of thing.
Now, when you talk about the region, are you talking about Cromwell or are you talking about the full region?
Yeah. So we're talking about the full lower Connecticut River Valley COG region, extending all the way down to the shore, all along the river. And so if you have something to add, please go ahead and do so now, being that your mic is on. And then once you're done, just mute your mic again and we'll have someone else speak.
Okay, I believe that probably there's more than likely that there is poverty all the way from Rocky Hill all the way down to Saybrook, just because, of our region. And I don't think that too many people really know about the poverty because you're looking at the homes and things like that. But when we talk to our social services, they just talk about how many people come to get food. I'm talking about like in Cromwell, and I'm sure it's all the way down the road.
Okay, thank you, Alice. And I somehow lost my hands. I can't see your raised hands. So someone please go ahead and speak. If you're waiting to speak, go ahead and unmute yourself and speak until I can see the raised hand feature here.
This is Marty. I live in Westbrook. It's interesting when you ask this, because so I'm one of those. I work at Pfizer, so I have an advanced degree, and I work in the science industry. So I mean, to Alice's point, I don't necessarily see the poverty, but I don't doubt that there is. Now, but I do, based on, and this is very interesting, trying to give points of view. Everything I say is going to be anecdotal based on my experience, but so it's really seeing the numbers and seeing. So I'm just, so it's very interesting to me, but besides that, I don't think I have much more to add. But thank you. It's very interesting.
Okay, sure. Okay, and
this is Kate. Kate from the town of Haddam. Thank you.
Say that the data reasonably represents what I see in my community, and I wouldn't guess to confront any of that data or challenge it, I should say.
Right. Great.
And this is Cindy from Chester. Same thing. I agree. The data looks correct. I would say, as I said in the last breakout session, that we have seen an increase definitely an increase in New York plates here in Chester. So we have seen an increase, with people moving into Chester, buying up homes quickly, actually, over the last few months here. So, the outcome of all of that remains to be seen, I guess. And I know that our food banks in our area have required more need to serve the populations with those who have lost jobs because of COVID. So, yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, Cindy.
Sure.
Anyone else? Go ahead, Marco. And Susie.
I think that I've seen some data sets and maps when we looked at data for the regional plan that that showed that our jobs were kind of equally distributed between Hartford, New Haven, and New London. So I just wanted to throw that in there. Besides just, Middletown, Hartford.
Okay. So jobs equally distributed to major cities outside the region. All right. Susie, go ahead.
Yeah, just a comment on
survive on that type of a ratio as far as money and expenses are concerned. So there's a cost of living issue that needs to be kind of discussed too with jobs in the region, I think, generally.
A really good point. Okay, I'm gonna take us to the next question because in the last group we spent far too long on the first question and barely touched on the other ones. So what issues, I mean, I know some of these overlap, issues that you see for your town or the region based on these trends? I mean, it sounds like I'm hearing, we're losing generations of people who want to stay, so that would be an issue.
Well, we've talked about housing costs. I know my son and his wife live in the Bronx, and they're looking to come back home. And, we're all keeping our eye on the real estate market and looking for any opportunities. And it's just, you look at the prices and it's just so challenging. But we're all aware of that.
The real estate market is kind of crazy too, with the COVID housing, people fleeing here, and more of an increase of costs. It's people coming from New York who spend 900,000 on a house here and it's cheap compared to where they come from. But the interesting thing to observe is going to be what's going to happen when our aging population, and there's not that demand for housing, and we have this new population coming in, which I think we need of younger people. If we get better jobs, how is that all going to work with people downsizing? And I think we're kind of in a little rut. We've got people who at some point are going to downsize because they're not going to want to maintain their full-time, home with, lawn mowing and so forth. And then you've got another generation that's trying to come in and find something that's affordable for now, but what's happening.
All right, we're all rejoining the main group. We in discussion group 2, we had a good discussion. So as before, I am going to just give a summary of what we discussed in my group, and then the other leaders will do theirs as well. So in our group, generally the data that was presented looked good. Including the interesting trends about COVID and people moving into the area in COVID. We saw anecdotal information from Durham and from Chester. We are seeing an increase in New York State license plates. I know I had to make a trip to the old Saybrook DMV, and I saw the parking lot was full of New York State license plates of people changing over. So that's a good sign of people, really moving in. If they're changing their license plates and agreeing to pay property tax on their cars. So let's see. We discussed how poverty. The face of poverty in our region doesn't look like a person pushing a shopping cart in an urban area. The stereotypical look of poverty, people are really really struggling to get by and using food stamps that you would never expect. So the look of poverty in our region does not fit our stereotypes of what poor people look like. Let's see. We also one thing we had a discussion about how jobs are located within the region, but we also have a lot of employment outside our region with people going to New Haven and Hartford and New London. So that was one comment that was made. The Alice numbers were shocking, and we observed that the communities that had higher costs of living, like Old Saybrook and Lyme, had higher Alice numbers, which makes some sense because those are expensive places to live, and if you are struggling on a modest income, you're going to be struggling more there than you might somewhere else. And in the more short term, we also discussed that COVID threw a lot of people out of work in the hospitality sector, and there's a great need for charity. We also have potentially a large undocumented people in our communities that need to be served better. And we also had discussion that small business owners feel like the state government is not state and I think federal government is not doing enough to support small businesses during COVID, but town committees in places like Chester are trying, but they need support. We had a little discussion about what COVID has done to our populations. You have people who are struggling before, who have no safety net, and that's really revealing those families and those businesses. For example, a lot of people will run personal expenses through their small business, and now they can't do that anymore. So a failing small business directly means issues for households. At the same time, we've seen our utility costs go through the roof for electricity, and other expenses, taxes going up at the same time as COVID is impacting people's income. And then also COVID has cut into people's ability to get a second job, whether it be seasonal employment in the hospitality sector or seasonal retail employment during the Christmas season to help pay off some of those bills. And that the struggle that people are dealing with is going deeper into the community. In talking about schools, we talked about the struggles within a regional school district, how people complain about the school budget, and there's a lot of tension around it. But at the same time, we generally have really good schools, and we need modern skills for modern jobs, and that comes from good schools. And then we also we capped a little discussion from our RPC meeting about how we need to be sure to replace the lost jobs with similarly paying jobs. And then the final question, we talked about the need of affordable housing, the real importance of universal high-speed internet to every home in the region, to allow for people to work from home, to attract people from larger metros, and also for education. We also talked about the terrible cellular service in many of our towns. In regard to the economy, we need to find places for contractors. So plumbers and contractors and builders are being moved out of parts of town, and that affects jobs. And a lot of times they're replaced by more passive industrial uses like storage areas that don't create jobs. And then the final obvious thing is that we need to get COVID under control and get and be planning in the short term for mass vaccinations so we can get our economy going again. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Megan, who will give a report from her group.
All right, thanks, Dan. So we moved much quicker this time. We were dismayed, but not necessarily surprised by the increased rates of ALICE households and poverty in the region because of the housing costs increasing, because of taxes increasing, and wages not keeping up with the cost of living. One thing that was very interesting that we talked about was kind of a multi-generational status change of how current generations can't necessarily keep the same type of living that their parents had or their grandparents had in the same place. And that's, again, because of wages not keeping up with cost of living and inflation and so on. We then talked about the dichotomy of job types that's emerged in the region. So actually not just the region, kind of more of a national trend. You have the really high paying, high skilled jobs, and then the lower paying, low skilled jobs. And we're missing a lot of those kind of mid-level technical skilled labor jobs. And that a lot of that is going by the wayside with automation. We need to kind of replace these jobs by encouraging new types of trade and skilled labor, possibly by bringing more trade schools into the region. If we do that, however, we also talked about how we need to house this population and how we need to make sure that our smaller homes that could be affordable to them don't turn over into McMansions with people from New York coming in and buying up all our housing stock and transitioning it to these giant mega homes. So I guess I'll pass it from there to Francisco.
All right, thanks, Megan. Our conversation was very consistent with everything that you're reporting. We heard from individuals that see real need in their communities for meals, and with significantly, demand going from the normal of like 40 meals distributed on a day to 300. That type, and we know that that's COVID related, but it's still something that's very concerning about what's happening in the region right now. So it's joblessness, maybe lack of jobs. A lot of people that we maybe have considered to have been retired or may not have voluntarily retired. They may have retired because of lack of employment opportunities in the region. And so that has implications on their ability to sustain their life if they're dependent just on Social Security or some other means. So that's all tied together. And when we talked about some of the concerns and issues, it was the cost of housing and the tax burden on the housing in the region, and how that trend moves in one direction, and that's up. And businesses going out of business, and what are the implications given their role in the community, not just in providing jobs, but as part of the identity of the community, as part of the culture of the community, and as anchor institutions in the community. Education costs are going up, even though enrollment is shrinking, and especially special education enrollment and cost. It's a challenge, and this was for Haddam, but we expect it applies to other districts and communities as well. Jobs, many jobs are temporary or contract type jobs, and we saw that most losses were in that field. And that's a real concern if the region's not providing access to enough permanent jobs that have benefits. And then we also see opportunities in all of the remote learning and remote civic participation that's happening just like this. And it makes us hopeful that there are opportunities to increase civic participation by adopting more virtual platforms on a permanent basis, and maybe even a lower cost as well. And then in wrapping up, there's also, while we have this migration and the housing market is benefiting, there's a concern about housing demand driving up housing costs. And there's a need for affordable housing. However, 830G as a mechanism for affordable housing can be very disruptive to communities that don't have a say in the location design of housing. And finally, regionalization of schools, more regionalization, more regional cost sharing is probably something that should be considered, along with more specialty high schools and academies. And that's it.
Okay, so we're going to resume to the third and final portion of this meeting. So I'll get that. We're going to talk about housing. And I have a feeling that a lot of our comments in our breakout groups about housing are going to be duplicated. So I know we're running a little bit over, so maybe we might be able to have a little bit shorter discussion because we've covered a lot of this already. But because we want to make sure that we're using your time efficiently. So just give me a second. My mouse is...
So maybe Eliza, should we have Eliza set this to 15 minutes?
Yeah. So.
Yeah, let's do that.
Yeah, because we are running a little bit over, and we want to make sure we get you out in 2 hours as we promised. It might be still a little bit over, but we're going to try to do our best to keep within the time we told you. So go ahead, Francisco.
Okay. And I meant the 15 minutes about the next breakout session is what I meant.
Exactly.
So household supply and market, basically you are a community of or a region of single family homes. And that is the truth for all of your communities, and Middletown is the exception to this. And it does vary. And in addition to that, you have very low amount of rental properties in the region. Next slide.
But I just point out that even Middletown has a large number of single-family detached.
Yeah, and even Middletown, although it has the highest number of multi-units and rentals, still has.
Actually, I think that's a mistake. I think the numbers got switched for Old Saybrook.
All right,
we'll fix that.
Oh, yeah. Okay. All right. Okay. So when we take a look at the entire region, there it is, 72%, 1 unit attached, and a little bit of one family unit attached. That's what we associate with townhouse or condos, and then some 2 and 3 family buildings, apartment buildings, but almost entirely 1 unit attached. Next. Your housing stock, as I had mentioned, rental comprises a very small share of it. However, even what you have is mostly in Middletown. Middletown has half of the rental housing in the region. Most communities have 5% or less of the region's share of rental housing. Next. Median home values. Middletown has the region's lowest median home value, which also happens to be, and this I really appreciate the irony, if you want to call it that, of median being the point in the middle, the exact point in the middle. And Middletown nailed it because Middletown has the exact same median home values as Connecticut. However, we see a range in the region with Lyme having a median value at $555,000, but the average for the region being around $325,000. So on the higher end of home values. Next. And these are the trends looking back all the way back to 1997. And the teal line is Lyme, so that's the highest home value community. And the middle line, the blue line, is the median across the region, and the purple line is Middletown being the lowest of median value community. And you saw everything climb up to 2007 and 8, and then fall off, and then has since recovered. And in the case of Lyme, not quite there, and Middletown's recovered, and the region's recovered. But the big question mark is, what are things going to look like after COVID? And right now, it's going up. Next. When we compare you to the state, what we see is the housing in the region is at the upper end of the middle. So you are very much like a higher upper middle class type housing region. And you have fewer $1 million homes, right? And most of that is consumed by Fairfield County's towns. And you also have far fewer lower value homes at less than 200,000. So you're on the upper end of the middle. Next. Now, when we look at housing cost burden, that basically means you spend 30% or more of your income on your housing costs. And if you own a home, that's your mortgage, insurance, taxes. And if you rent, it's your rent and utilities, that sort of thing. And half of those who rent are housing cost burden. And that shrinks as you move over to people that own with a mortgage. That's 30% of people. And people that own their home outright, no more mortgage, it's still 19% of people are housing cost burden. So even if you own your home, you pay for your mortgage, you may still have a hard time affording to stay in that home. And many of those people are retired. Next. When we look at affordable housing, most of the affordable housing in the region is located in Middletown. Which accounts for 70% of the region's affordable housing. However, across the region, only 8% of housing meets the state's definition of affordable with respect to 830G. And 830G, I'm throwing that around. That's a state statute that mandates every community to work towards getting to 10% of what the state defines as affordable housing. And so we see that many communities are at 1%, 2%, or 3% of what the state defines as affordable. Next. All right, so back to the COVID impact. Median sales price, and this is looking back to November of last year, it's up. And that trend started, it normally starts in the spring of every year. It's somewhat seasonal, but that trend started in March and has been going up relatively steadily. And it's currently at 300,000, whereas across Connecticut, it's 270,000 is the median. This is sale price, which differs a little than median home value, but it's up. Next. All right, I got through that pretty quick. We'll go to our breakout sessions and we'll spend just 15 minutes there, and we'll do it again. So we'll see you in the session.
As the cost of housing expands and more, and there's less stock available in our town, because there is. I mean, they go up and they go right away.
Okay.
But the taxes are lagging behind as far as being.
Just want to mention the fact that many of us are sewer avoidance towns, and it can be very challenging to find soils in areas that will work for clustered housing or larger numbers of units in one area, higher density. So I think I would love to have the region take a look at that and maybe come up with a regional plan to help us, help the towns get beyond that reliance on septic, and also the issue that we have with having to remediate many of the areas along the shoreline.
Yeah, so when you say remediate, you're talking about contamination of the sound?
Right, yeah, I'm talking about the individual.
That's a very fair point. Thank you for pointing that out.
I would say though, it's median, not average. So
Right.
if you had $1 billion house, it wouldn't change the median that much. I mean, these are all median, so it's, but anyway, it's a region-wide problem in any case.
Any other comments?
I'll make one comment. I think, and I haven't really wrapped my head around this completely, but the state's definition for affordable housing, and I can't remember the specifics of it, but it doesn't seem to take into account older houses that are smaller that sell for, I think, under the standard, but for some reason they're not counted, right? And so there is something about how the state defines and the reality of what's available in a given town.
I was under the impression that affordable housing was specific housing. It's not just sale prices of any house, but it has to be like deeded affordable housing. That was what I thought. Yeah.
Yeah, right. And I think you're right. And mostly my point there is when you show a stat like that to someone who doesn't know that sort of nuance, like you get the feeling that there's nothing available in your town for someone who doesn't make enough to afford the median home price. And that's not really true.
Right, you're absolutely correct. And the way we tend to refer to that is statutory affordable housing versus what's attainable housing. And, we've seen, based on our research in the existing conditions report, that there's actually a fair amount of housing that is older, is smaller, could technically be considered attainable or even affordable, just not under the statutory definition in the region. In our last group, we talked about making sure that that housing doesn't get converted to unaffordable, unattainable housing by people coming in and from out of state and buying it up. That's a good point. Thank you for clarifying. So I'm going to jump to the next question. What issues do you see for your town or the greater region based
Once again, a really nice discussion. So I'll quickly go over some of the top issues that we discussed. First of all, the first question about whether we just answered yes, whether this data was made sense, just because the issue of affordable housing had come up in the last two discussions. So we'll just skip to issues issues based on these trends. The first one is many of our towns, or most of our towns, are sewer avoidance towns. They don't have access to sewer, and where people want to build and where people want to live isn't necessarily in relation to where the good soils are. So we have carrying capacity of the natural carrying capacity of the land for septic, and then we have the intersection of regulation. We have in some places you have issues with wastewater going into the sound along our shoreline. So septic systems really are a problem with keeping the sound clean. But also we have DEEP doesn't allow engineered septic systems. So you have to use native soils. And if your native soils don't perk, that's a problem. On a different topic, we talked about how these issues of septic are driving towards sewers, which have lots of costs associated with them and lots of other development issues that are associated with building sewers. We talked about the need for financial literacy, that we're in a hot real estate market for the first time in a generation, and people are used to being able to sort of waltz in with their 20%, and then houses are being swooped up by investors who are paying cash, and we need more savvy home buyers. And there may be an opportunity here for the chamber, the COG, or one of our local banks like Liberty Bank to provide education to first-time home buyers and how to navigate that. We talked about surprise that we're actually overall in the region at 8% affordable. We were surprised by that, and that maybe some of the higher renting percentage in Middletown could be driven by some of academic rentals. We also talked a little bit about climate change and sea level rise and how it will impact our homes, first by storm flooding, but also seawater infiltration affecting wells and the functioning of septic systems. We also discussed that with businesses closing, there might be opportunities for new businesses to open in some of the vacated retail spaces, but also we may not need as much retail space as we had before, and there might be some opportunities for maybe mixed-use development. For example, if we have a struggling mall, such as like an outlet mall in Westbrook, you could potentially add a residential component and make it more of a mixed-use community, and that could be a way of dealing with some of the downturn in demand for brick and mortar retail. Steps we can take to address in the plan. Obviously, recommendations to support affordable housing. In Portland, they have accessory units allowed by right if they're internal to the building and they meet zoning. But if they're on sewer, septic, and well, it does require health district approval. But they also allow detached accessory units by site plan approval. And what they've noticed there is it allows for multi-generational tenancy. So you have families with older relatives and younger relatives all living together, and allows them to stay in the community, whether they're young people returning to community or older people who need the support of their younger family members. We had a discussion about the property tax burden and how we need some solution on a state level to lower property taxes, and but of course not cut our services, but of course, a little discussion about implementing natural hazard plans, and also transportation issues, that you need to have a good transit to connect to affordable housing. For example, the last mile issue, there might be a commuter rail service on Shoreline East, but if you can't get to the station easily, it doesn't matter if it's there. And then finally, for deep to allow for alternative septic. All right, I'll turn it over to Megan.
Thanks. So our first note on this topic was as well very consistent and unsurprising, with a few caveats. A point was raised that the data for Lyme gives the impression that perhaps it is a town filled with mansions, and that really in reality on the ground it feels like it's more similar to the rest of the region. So just throwing that caveat out there. The state definition of affordable, we noted, was inconsistent with the reality of what's technically attainable for people in the region. And also that in Haddam, there are new homes being built, even though there is an existing supply of housing available. We also talked about the high cost of staying in a home, utilities, taxes, materials. We asked about the implications of not having enough affordable housing and what that means for the diversity of people that we are able to have in our region. Let's see, what else? We need to find a way to provide affordable housing in our communities in a way that works for the community, that's consistent with the community's character, and that there tends to be an issue anytime affordable housing is coming in at a density exceeding what the zoning allows. It causes controversy and backlash to any affordable housing projects. And also we talked about the struggle of even just saving up for people to buy a house. The down payment and the closing costs are cost prohibitive for a lot of younger people. As far as steps we can take to address these issues, we talked about looking at form-based zoning codes. We talked about increasing the number of available rental units. We talked about whether if we increased the number of rental units in our region, we could get people to come here and essentially test out the region before purchasing a home. We talked about creating a diversity of housing types that fit within our communities. We talked about provision of sewers, and we talked about encouraging towns to proactively identify areas where affordable and attainable housing could be built, because otherwise we are left to the mercy of developers to tell us where they want to put affordable housing. So with that, I'll turn it to Francisco.
Okay, and I am going to try to make this quick because my internet connection kind of stalled out on me a couple of times already, so we're so close. Property tax collection is down in Cromwell, and so we wonder if that's going to be an issue throughout the region, and is it going to be something that remains an issue for a while? We know that's COVID related. However, at the same time, homes are selling fast, and it's how are people affording these homes when people are out of work? And so there's this whole weird dynamic that's happening all at the same time. When we talked about some of the issues, it's this double-edged sword of it's great to have increasing housing values, especially given the fact Connecticut has lagged the country for so long now. However, that makes it difficult for people trying to buy homes who are in the region or moving into the region. Affordable housing, you guys covered that ground, but it remains important for both young people and for the older population. And we talked about a mixed-use development maybe being part of the solution or a good model for the region. Having housing in commercial areas along with retail businesses and service-based businesses. And then finally, repurposing of buildings, whether commercial buildings, institutional buildings, should be considered for conversion into housing or for mixed-use development. And then you guys talked about septic, how important that is in a region that has a lot of rural communities that don't have sewer, is that there is support for engineered systems, and the permitting process is made a little easier, and then much of that is tied up at the state level, but we realize that's one of the big constraints on housing development in the region. And that's it.
Great. Well, thank you, Francisco. So let me get the presentation started again, and we'll wrap it up. So I'll introduce Megan Juflis, our senior planner, who will wrap up this evening. So just one second. All right. So go ahead, Megan.
Okay, thank you. And I'll go quickly. So you can see on the screen a breakdown of the anticipated timeline for the creation of the RPOCD. We kicked off the project in winter of 2019, and we anticipate completing in spring 2021. So we're currently in phase 4 of this process at the regional thematic meetings, which you'll see in the 4th column, first line. Following these series of meetings, the last one will be January 5th, 2021. We'll be posting the draft RPOCD online for public comment. So we're anticipating having that posted by the end of January. So check the website, which I will give you the link to on the next slide, for access to the draft document, and please provide your thoughts and comments. So let's see, there's the project website. Going forward, there are several ways you can get involved, including visiting this website, rivercogregionalplan.org. You can sign up for email notifications, and please share this presentation with others in your community. On the website, you'll also see all of our other previous presentations if you didn't attend, or if you want to see what happened in the other municipal meetings, please go to the website, check them all out, share them with everybody that you know. And then most importantly, please join us at the upcoming workshops and have your opinion heard. So Sam already showed this slide a little bit earlier. These are your RPC members. The RPC is charged with overseeing the creation of the RPOCD, and the members are your representatives in this process. So take a look at the list and find your representatives. A lot of the representatives are in this meeting. So you can reach out to them with your thoughts, your comments, and concerns. We have email links on the project website, but you can also see them here. For the most part, it's just the town rpc@gmail.com. There's a couple like Essex, Portland, and Westbrook that have a 1 after it. So Westbrook rpc1@gmail.com. But again, the most important address to remember is rivercogregionalplan.org, because all of these emails are there. Also, my email is there, mjuflis@rivercog.org. So then our next steps are the upcoming workshops. Our next one is the Visioning and Branding Workshop, December 15th at 6 p.m. It'll be a very similar format to this. And then we have Mapping Workshop Part A, which will be December 21st. And then Mapping Workshop Part B, which will be January 5th. So we hope to see you all there. Tell your friends.
So thank you very much, Megan. We're 20 minutes over, so I apologize for that. But I don't know if anyone has any final comments or questions before we sign off for the evening.
I'd just like to say thank you to everyone for participating tonight. We know it's a demand on your time, but this is a very important project for our region. And I'm very glad that everyone could make it. And I appreciate all the work that was done by Francesco from FHI, and Sam and Megan and Torrance and everyone at RiverCOG as well.
Thank you, Frank. So right before this presentation, I uploaded the PowerPoint to our website for our project. So RiverCOGregionalplan.org. I will be uploading the video of tonight's meeting as well. So please share that with anyone you think that might be interested. Also, if you haven't signed in the chat box on the lower bar of the Zoom chat, please sign in. And if you want to give us your email address, we'll make sure that you're included in future mailings for notices about meetings as we create our region's first regional plan. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good night.
Yeah, and with that, I'll say good night and stay safe and stay healthy. I'll keep on for a lot of people to type in their names and the emails if anyone has not done so yet.
Thank you.